So back to our examination of Pilgrim's Progress tonight as we come to the second chapter now, which is entitled, you remember in the table of contents, it's entitled Seeking the Savior. We left Christian and Pliable walking on their way towards the wicket gate. And as they are going, you remember that Christian gives to Pliable answers to the questions that he poses about what is waiting for them in that place. And Pliable is going along with Christian because he has believed these things, heard them, believed them, and is looking forward to them. Which leads us to the first section of this new chapter. But before we go there, let me just pause for a moment and suggest something, okay? It is possible to read this allegory and assume that Bunyan intended it, or that it should be intended, for us to read it and assert it chronologically. What I mean by that is to assert that the story is laid out in such a way that it would represent the typical Christian experience, chronologically speaking. You come to understanding of your sinfulness in the city that you belong to, and then you set out on a journey, and then you run into this place, and so on. And sometimes that might be true, but there may be a different way of understanding this as an allegory, and that is to think about it not so much in terms of its chronology, but in terms of its various realities, each of them spoken of in different sections throughout the journey, that would, of course, in Pilgrim's life be in the chronology that Bunyan applied it to, but would not necessarily be that way in our lives. Meaning something that we would experience somewhere along the way that may have been very early in Christian's pilgrimage, but not necessarily in ours, and may not even be something that we experience in our own. In other words, let's not read it as a definitive chronological examination of every single Christian's life. That may help us to understand some of the discussion that we were having about, okay, is Christian a believer at this point or not a believer? Is he wearing a load of sin on his back? These sorts of things. All these kinds of questions may be fraught with, okay, in the story, that may be the case, but that's not necessarily how it's always going to be for us, okay? Again, as an allegory, we can't treat it as some sort of absolute treatise on theology. Or, I'm fond of saying, often from the pulpit, be careful building your theology from narratives. Whether those narratives be biblical narratives or such narratives as this. Many people have gone very wayward building their theology on stories or storylines. So you got to be careful, okay? So let's be careful that we don't treat this as some sort of absolute treatise on the realities of how, the chronology of the Christian life goes, okay? So even as Christian and his friend stumble into this place tonight, let's not assume that that's necessarily going to be the case for every believer, or that that is a necessary element of what it means to be a believer, okay? Right? So let's learn the larger lessons from each section and apply them to our lives well, and let's not get too burdened, if you will, or, pun intended, bogged down in the details. Okay? So, we continue tonight into Bunyan's examination of this man named Christian who's walking, as I said, with a man by the name of Pliable. And they come to a place which is called the Slough of Despond. Now, just before we go any further, let me point this out to you. The word spelled S-L-O-U-G-H, not a word we use in the English language anymore. And it can be translated, not translated, I spend way too much time in Greek. It can be pronounced different ways. Okay? It could be pronounced slough, with the GH having that F sound in the end, slough, or to rhyme with tough, it can be slough, or it can even be pronounced slough. So it can be the Slough of Despond, the Slough of Despond, or the Slough of Despond. I will leave that entirely up to you. I'm going to call it the Slough of Despond because that's what I've been using for years, and so I'm comfortable with it. But if you're offended by that, well, my apologies. I'm sorry? Should we debate that? Yeah. Well, you go right ahead. You and Vicky argue it over. Let me know who wins. All right. Call it the slough, the slough, or the slough, whichever you wish to prefer. In any case, it is a place that is, it is a place of hopelessness. It's a place of being bogged down by a sense of weariness and hopelessness, as you'll see even as you get into the story. Interestingly enough, the second word, despond, is also a word we don't very use except in its adjectival form, which is despondent. And even that, we don't use that often anymore. So despond is that sense of hopelessness, that sense of weariness, that sense of feeling like the world is crushing you sort of thing. That's what this is, a place of despond. Remember, we talked about the fact that when Bunyan wrote this, he was thinking about the area around his own hometown where there was a miry, clay-like place where people often got stuck on the sides of the roads coming into the little town that he lived in. In fact, it was caused by the local river that would overrun its banks each spring and leave behind a great silty, muddy mess, which once wet became almost like quicksand, and you'd fall into it and you're stuck in it. Okay, so that's the picture of this place, all right? And Bunyan specifically puts this here. And let me also suggest that Bunyan puts this particular section in the book because he himself, as an early Christian, experienced this. He writes about it in his Grace Abounding book. So this is very much from his own personal experiences. Okay. Now, just as they, that is Christian and Pliable, had ended this talk, and what I mean is the end of the previous section where where Christian is telling Pliable about the various promises that are to be given. You remember, he says there's an everlasting kingdom, an everlasting life to be given. There are crowns of glory to be given. There'll be no more crying, no sorrow, for he is the owner of the place will wipe all tears, etc. And so they're talking about that as they're going along, all right? So now as they had just ended this talk, they drew near to a very miry slough that was in the midst of the plain. And they being heedless, or not paying attention, not watching where they're going, okay, they being heedless did both fall suddenly into the bog. And the name of the slough was Despond. Okay, so they fall into this miry mud pit. They're walking along, they're not paying attention, they're not giving heed, and boom, they find themselves in this place. Here, therefore, they wallowed for a time, being grievously bedaubed with the dirt, covered with the dirt, soaked with the dirt, bedaubed. Again, notice how many of these words we don't use anymore in modern English. Because they missed the stepping stones in the middle. So apparently, there was a path that you could follow to go across this miry bog, but not paying attention, they wander into it by accident. They're just going along, they're talking, they're not paying attention. They may have been going a little too fast, and boom, they find themselves in the midst of it because they missed the stepping stones in the middle. And Christian, because of the burden that was on his back, began to sink in the mire. All right, so you can see the picture, right? A couple of guys are now stuck in the mud bog. They walked along, they walked right into it. Didn't even notice it. Didn't even see where they were going, and in they went. All right? Got the picture in your head? All right. Then said Pliable, "Ah, neighbor Christian, where are we now?" "Truly," said Christian, "I do not know." All right, so they wander in this place, and Pliable asks, where have we wound up? Christian says, "I don't know." Now, we will know by the end of this section. We will know where they are, and we will know what the point of this is. Bunyan will make that clear as the story unfolds, right? So at this point, though, they've wandered into it and they don't know. Now remember, this is a metaphor, as is everything here, representing something going on in Christian's life. In this case, Pliable's life as well. And so they've gone along on this journey, starting out, and one of the very first things they encounter is this miry bog. So it's part of their journey, it's part of this walk that they're making, setting out to go to the wicket gate. At that, Pliable began to be offended and angrily said to his fellow, all right, it's not surprising that Pliable is angry because he's pliable, all right, because he shifts with the winds. All right, that's what pliable means. He's not fixed. He can be easily swayed of mind and heart. That's why Bunyan calls him pliable. So now here he is, and he begins to be offended. Now, this particular case, offended is being used not as we use it today in the sense of some personal offense, but it's offended meaning that I've been hurt by this, I don't like this, it's something I wish to be out of. All right? And angrily said to his fellow, angrily said to Christian, "Is this the happiness you've told me of all this while? Is this what you were promising me when you said earlier that we were going to a place of everlasting life where there are crowns of glory and we're going to have garments like the sun and so forth? No more crying. Is this what you promised me? Is this what you told me all the while? If we have such ill speed at our first setting out, what may we expect between us and our journey's end?" Meaning, if this is the kinds of things we're going to encounter along the way, then what might we expect between here and our journey's end? What other kinds of troubles are we going to run into? If this is one of the troubles we're going to run into, what are the other kinds of troubles we're going to run into? Or, by implication, you never told me that we would experience these things. You never told me that. You told me there was all rainbows and unicorns at the end of this thing. And so now I'm going along thinking that's what's supposed to be, and all of a sudden I've discovered that ain't the case. Which, by the way, Christian himself understands, right? He doesn't know where they are either. But Pliable is, of course, complaining about it. If I get out again with my life, if I manage to escape this thing with my life, you shall possess the brave country alone. In other words, I'm leaving you, you go by yourself, I'm not going with you. You can continue the journey if you make it out and continue on your way, and I'm not going with you. And with that, he gave a desperate struggle or two and got out of the mire on that side of the slough, which was next to his own house. In other words, where they went in, he came back out, turned around, in other words. So away he went, and Christian saw him no more. And the reference to Luke 18, of course, to Luke 8 is, there he goes. Turned back, turned away. Pliable's character now shows. See, we didn't really see the totality of it in the previous passage, but we got one half of it in the previous section. And the one half of it was, I'll go with you because you're promising me good things. Okay, cool. I'll go with that. But then the other side of his character comes out. Now when the trouble arises, well, the pliable is going to turn around. He's not fixed. That's why he's pliable. He is not fixed. Christian is fixed on the journey. But pliable is just that. He's pliable. Now, you remember, we likened pliable to one of the characters in Jesus' story of the sower and the seed. It's really actually the seed and the soils, right? And that was which one? What's that? Potentially the rocky ground or the... No, not the hard ground. Because he did go along. Okay, so he did sprout up. The weedy ground. Yeah, you have first the shallow soil, but you also have then the weedy soil. And those really are, in Jesus' parables, really very much the same. Different way of looking at it, but really the same. What's the point of it? Someone hears the message, the gospel, and goes, hey, I like that. I want to believe that. But then as they're going along with this belief, shallow as it is, because it gets planted either in shallow soil or it gets planted amongst that which chokes it out, it fades. You'll notice that half of the seed falls into one of those two categories. Now, 1/4 of it falls on the rocky soil that doesn't produce, the path soil that produces nothing, no results at all. But in this case, Pliable did actually say, yeah, I'll go with you under the promises and under the delights that you have promised to me, right? Oh, yeah, these are great things. I want these things. But as soon as trouble comes, guess what happens? I'm out of here. As soon as difficulty comes, I'm out of here. You see, you have to, I think, you have to look at that parable and realize that the 3 of the 4 types of soil are warnings that the vast majority of people are going to hear the gospel, are going to fall into these categories. The vast majority who hear the gospel are going to fall into these categories. They're going to hear the message, and many are going to say, I don't want anything to do with it. But there will be also many, in this case half, who are going to say, yes, I want that, but it doesn't last because it's not real conversion. It's not a real conversion. It's a false conversion. The New Testament warns against false conversions frequently. And part of the reason it does so is to say to those of us who have in fact been converted, stay on the journey. Don't apostatize. That's the whole point. He who perseveres to the end will be saved, right? And so Jesus is warning, don't be like Pliable here, who gets to the first bit of trouble and immediately runs away. It's too much work. I don't want it. Now let me suggest, this doesn't really come out of this directly, but I'm going to make an indirect sort of observation here. You will notice that when Christian describes the gospel, if you will, to Pliable, he describes it only in terms of the blessings that are going to come. He doesn't make mention of the difficulties along the way. Now, as we can see, since he doesn't know where they are, he probably doesn't know of them yet. He has to learn of them by experience, right? He has to learn them by experience, which is probably true for both of us. But how many men who know better, or should know better, when it comes to preaching the gospel, don't actually warn the potential convert of the dangers that lie ahead, and rather just kind of paper those over and tell you only the good things about what's coming, and then leave the poor person in a state of shock when they do discover something that is good? Is that maybe the reason why Jesus told the parable? To say, listen, if you're going to tell people about me, okay, this is Jesus speaking now. If you're going to tell people about me, and you're going to tell them to come and follow me, then you better be sure to tell them not only that there are great rewards at the end, that's fine, but you better tell them too that there's great cost involved to get there. And it's not going to be easy. I mean, you really can't get a better illustration of that than Jesus himself saying, listen, if you want to be my disciple, you have to take up a cross. And every single person listening to him would have understood exactly what he meant. A cross, an instrument of execution. An instrument that you carried out to a place and died. That is what you have to carry in order to be my disciple. You want to follow me, Jesus says? Then you pick up the worst thing imaginable on this planet and you follow me. because that's what it's going to take. That kind of commitment is what it's going to take to follow Christ.
The one carrying the cross does not look back to the world either.
He's got no hope to look back to the world. There's only one place to go with that cross, and that's to a place we're going to nail you to it and you're going to die. So part of what I would observe from this is, as Pliable is being told by Christian about all the good things to come, he's not been given the whole story, and his character comes out. And of course, that's Bunyan's point. He wants you to see this. Don't be the pliable type who is easily swayed by what comes, or as the writer says, or as Paul says, to be blown about by every wind of doctrine that blows by the front door, if you will. This is a call to a commitment. Christian faith is a call to a commitment that must resonate within us for the rest of our lives. And it will be, yes, it will encounter troubles along the way, and things that will work to shake your faith, no doubt. But you must carry on, which is what Christian's going to do, okay? He's going to carry on. Wherefore Christian was left to tumble in the Slough of Despond alone. All right, so there he is. He's all alone. He still endeavored to struggle to that side of the slough that was farthest from his own house. Where did he try to get to? The other side, okay? If he would have gone back in the same direction as Pliable, he would have been going in the opposite direction from where he was headed, because he entered into the slough on the side that was closest to his own house, because that's where he had come from. So he's trying to get to the other side, which is the direction that he's trying to go to. So he's continuing to try to struggle to that side of the slough, which is furthest from his own house, and next to the wicket gate, meaning in the direction of the wicket gate. That's the direction to get to the gate, which he did, but could not get out because of the burden that was upon his back. He struggles in it because he's carrying a burden. Now, we're going to learn as this section finishes what this is about and what that burden is really meaning here, okay? And I've specifically not gone there yet because I want to let the writer do that, all right? This is painting a picture of a man now who is struggling with something, and the burden on his back has now made it very difficult for him in that situation, all right? Are we good with that? Yes. That's correct.
It made me think of Matthew 9:12 and 13, where Jesus said he came to help the sick, not the well.
Yes. Yeah, poor Pliable doesn't bear that burden. He's not sick. Yeah. But poor Christian is carrying something on his back. And it keeps him from getting out because he's carrying it. Now, we'll learn what this is in a second. But I beheld in my dream, okay, so now the dreamer here tells us that a man came to Christian, whose name was Help. Now, perfect name for this guy, all right, because he's going to be a help. And asked him what he did there. What are you doing in this bog, is the question. What are you doing? Sir, said Christian, I was bidden to go this way by a man called Evangelist, who directed me also to yonder gate, that I might escape the wrath to come. And as I was going thither, I fell in here. All right, so he explains what we've already known, which is that he's been told by Evangelist, you need to go to the wicket gate, see the light, the wicket gate's over there, go there, follow that, and you'll be given instructions there what to do. So Evangelist sends him. And poor old Christian followed his advice and went and says to Help, and I fell in here. Okay? So Help then says, but why did you not look for the steps? Remember, it said earlier that there were stepping stones in the middle, back in the first paragraph. Apparently, there is a way to get across this despond, this Slough of Despond. There's a way to get across this thing. So the Help says, well, why didn't you use the path to get across? Why didn't you use the path? And Christian says, fear followed me so hard that I fled the next way and fell in. All right, now what does that mean? It would seem, Christian says, I was so afraid of what I was running from and running so fast to get away from it. Fear made me run so fast. I wasn't paying attention where I was going, and I wound up headfirst into it. I wasn't paying attention because of my fear. See it? I wasn't paying attention. Fear followed me so hard that I fled the next way and fell in. I didn't know where I was going. I knew where I was going. What I didn't know was what's in between, and so I was just running to get away from it, and boom, I fell in. Now, you'll notice he doesn't blame Pliable. Okay? Then said Help, give me thy hand. So he, that is Christian, gave him his hand, and Help drew him out and set him upon some ground, meaning some solid ground outside of this, and bade him to go on his way. And I think that as Bunyan wrote this, I think he had Psalm 40 in mind when he wrote this, because in Psalm 40, verse 1, it says, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. I mean, it's almost as though he writes a story around those two verses of Scripture. Help helps him out of this slough, helps him out of this place of despondency, this place of hopelessness. Because in point of fact, Christian wasn't getting out on his own. He needed help. He needed someone to come along and help him to get out of this condition that he's in. So it naturally arises at this point, all right, what is this place? And other questions that come along with it. It would seem to be my response, and probably yours as well. You know, you get plucked out of this place, you want to turn around and say to Help, what is this? All right, and that's where Bunyan goes. And I think he goes there because he wants to explain what this thing is all about. What is this aspect of the Christian life all about? Then Christian stepped to him that plucked him out, all right, walked up to him and said, Sir, wherefore, since over this place is the way from the city of destruction to yonder gate, meaning the path to get to yonder gate from the city of destruction goes through this place. Obviously, I'm going through it. I went through it. And you know this, okay? You know this. You know that this is the case. Since it is over this place is the way from the city of destruction to the yonder gate, is it that this place is not mended, that poor travelers might go thither with more security? Or more specifically, what he is saying is, why don't you fix it? If we have to travel from the city of destruction to the wicket gate, and we have to go through this place, well, why don't you fix it so people don't fall into the thing? Okay, that's what he means when he says mend it. Why not mend this place? That poor travelers might not go thither with more security, that when we get to this place, we're not going to fall in. Why hasn't it been prevented? In other words, why isn't it that this place hasn't been walled off and, detour signs put up and everything that's necessary so that we don't fall into it? Or I suppose another way of saying it is, why did you let me fall into this place? Might be another way to say that more explicitly, right? So Christian is asking the question is, what is this place and why is this place? Probably the more important question is, why is this place rather even than what is it? So Help gives him an answer. Help tells him, here's what this is. This slough is caused by the many fears and doubts which settle here. Aha! What is this place? This is the accumulation of the fears and doubts of those who travel the road. This is the accumulation of the fears and doubts. Fears and doubts of what? Fears of what? Doubts of what? What's that? Maybe, but I think that's too general. Okay, maybe the fear of losing what we have. Okay, that's certainly a possibility. I would say that is an acceptable answer here. But I don't think that's precisely what Bunyan is getting to.
Where we're going is not worth the effort.
Okay, that is intimated.
Where we're going.
That's right. That is what's intimated. We don't know what's really at the other end. Isn't that the point that Pliable gets himself into? He's hearing what Christian says about the place, but he then doubts the veracity of Christian's response to it. And what's he do? Turns around and goes back.
Since the burden,
What else?
since the burden is so heavy that it's keeping him from getting out himself,
Yes.
could it be doubts that the great guilty now knows about could ever be taken away?
Yes. It's possible that because this, let me rephrase what you said, okay, so people can hear me. There is a sense in which the burden that Christian is bearing is so great that he can't get out of the mire with it on his back, that it represents the very fact that he'll never get rid of the baggage on his back.
Too bad, God will never forgive.
God can never forgive me for what I have. Okay? What else is, so what is it precisely that is filling this place up from that explanation?
Oh, it's lack of faith.
True, but I'm looking for something specific and concrete here. What's filling up this place and causing this? For all the travelers that come out of the city of destruction and head to the wicket gate, what's this accumulating here? But I'm looking for something specific. Shame. Thank you. The shame of past sin. Or as Don so eloquently put it, could I ever be forgiven for what I have done? Is it even possible for me to be forgiven for the wickedness that I have? That I have lived in the city of destruction, and I have been a part of the city of destruction, and I'm part of the reason the city is going to be destroyed.
I wonder if Saul in a couple of days of blindness in Damascus had that.
Yes, indeedy. This place is filled up with all of the doubts and fears of whether or not the promises made by evangelists and read in the book are actually true. And is this not exactly what many who turn back for? Why they turn back?
But there's no indication that Christian is adding to it. He's just going through it. He's experiencing it, but he's not adding to it.
I think Bunyan's assuming that the burden on his back is adding to it in the sense, okay? Yeah. It's a place where the accumulated, well, let's read on. You'll see what I'm saying here. It's caused by the many fears and doubts which settle here. It has swallowed up at least 20,000 carloads. That's not Toyotas. That's, okay, that's carloads in that day would have been, whole units full of stuff, wagons or whatever would be used to haul things, right? 20,000 carloads of wholesome instructions. It has swallowed up at least 20,000 carloads of wholesome instructions. That's a difficult phrase. What does he mean by that? It is a place where all of the messages that have been given to people who have abandoned the faith have been ignored. All the messages that evangelists gave to however many others who took the path and got to this place and we're unsure, I don't know if the promises are true. I don't know if I can be forgiven for the load of sin that I'm carrying on my back. I don't know if these things, 20,000 carloads of good instruction apparently was not enough to get him through this place. So many, in other words, ignored what was said. It is such a place as cannot be mended. It is the descent whither the filth that attends, get it now, conviction for sin doth continually run. All right, that's the statement that tells us Don's perspective is right here. This is the shame and the doubts and the conviction of sin and the possibility that I cannot be forgiven because of the massiveness of my sin that accumulates in this place, and it can't be mended. Why not? It can't be mended, it can't be fixed, it can't be done away with. Why? Because it is normal for human beings to ask that question. We cannot escape it, nor should we should we, really? Is the cross of Christ sufficient to cover our sin? Be careful how you answer that. Because sometimes in the darkness of the night, after a particularly ugly day, we may find ourselves wondering at times, right? Does God really love me? Am I truly saved? I look at my life and I say, how could such as me be loved by God when I know what I am? When I know what I have done? You see? It's normal. That's why it can't be mended. It can't be changed. The gospel doesn't come with the promise that the moment you receive Christ, you will then have no troubles with the sin in your life. Now, we could only wish that that were true. I kind of get the implication that Christians saying, how come you don't just fix this place so that we never have to worry about guilt or shame or any of those other kinds of things? And our Lord says, nope, that's not how I'm doing this. I want you to walk through that also. If you can come out on the other side, then you belong to me.
And isn't Bunyan's point here that it was a mistake for him to fall into it, but there he should have taken a stepping stone?
Okay, so I was just about to ask that question. What are the stepping stones? What are the stepping stones? Now, would it be true that Bunyan still had to carry the load on his back across the stepping stones? Hmm? It would be. It would be looking to, I think what it is, and I'm open to debate on this because I've read a couple of different commentators, I'm not exactly sure, but I would perceive the stepping stones to be those kinds of helps that we are given, even in our initial faith, our initial introduction to the Christian faith, however weak that might be, right? That might be enough for us to realize, you know what? Yes, I am a sinner and I'm filled with shame and so forth, but I'm continuing on the way and I'm not going to fall into despair. I'm going to avoid those temptations along the way. But do you not get the impression from the story that very few people found the stepping stones? How do I know that? Because the slough was full. Exactly. So it seems to me that the stepping stones are there to indicate, yes, there is hope in the midst of this matter. Now, the second question that goes with that is, who is help? Who does help represent in this story? Okay, that's probably, given the fact that he's called a helper in the New Testament. Okay, that's very reasonable. Are there any other possibilities? Okay, others who are encouragers. Or we might say, Pliable was no help, right? Because he was more concerned about himself and the rewards and so forth that he couldn't be bothered. So this would be someone, another person, potentially, in life who would come along and help you through these dark times. Somebody who's gone through the slough themselves. Maybe himself standing in the stones, or maybe himself getting help from someone else out of the miry pit. Yeah. It seems to me as though it's possible that Bunyan here is speaking of this in the sense that help is potentially the Spirit, but possibly even greater than that, the sense in which this is a communal effort. Where do we go for help when we are despondent and filled with shame? Where do we go? What has God ordained for us? The church, the family of God. This is the place where we come and confess our sins to one another. And this is where we come and seek help through these times, right? So again, you could read the allegory any way you want to. I mean, help could be something else entirely for you. That's fine. But I'm interpreting it as to being a man who has fallen into despondency over his own burden, over the shame of his own sin, and a helper comes along. A man, another man comes along, potentially one who's been through the trouble himself, comes and helps him through. Someone more mature. Someone potentially who's been to the wicket gate and now comes back to help those who fall into the miry bog.
He asked the question, why did you miss the steps? So obviously he knew where they were.
Yeah.
So he's on the steps telling you.
But it could have been a rhetorical question in the sense of, there were steps here, you could have taken them, why'd you miss those? And the answer is helpful. He says, I wasn't paying attention. I'm running to get away from something, I'm not paying attention where I'm going.
Well, I didn't know they were steps.
Yeah. It's almost like you could say, this is Christian in the cage stage. You know, he's running away, he's taking off, and he's not paying attention to where he's going.
My enthusiasm got ahead of me.
Their enthusiasm got ahead of me. Or in his case, my fear got ahead of me. It forced me to run at such a pace that I just fell right into this place, right? And therefore it is called the Slough of Despond. For as the sinner is awakened about his lost condition, there arises in his soul many discouraging apprehensions, which all of them get together and settle in this place. And this is the reason of the badness of this ground. So Bunyan explains through Helper what this is. This is the accumulated troubles of men who come to understand their sinfulness, fear the judgment that is to come, rightly so, run from it towards Christ, and then find themselves, after settling a little bit, after a little time, after a little bit of the journey, suddenly the realization of who they really are and what might be in store and whether or not the promises are true and so forth. For as the sinner is awakened about his lost condition, see, what Help says is you've been awakened. You've come to understand your lost condition. You've come to understand that you're under the wrath of the destruction of the city. You've come to realize that. And so you wandered into this place, and this is what happens. Men wander into this place of despondency. They wonder, can God save even a wretch like me? Bunyan experienced this. In fact, when he writes about it in his semi-autobiographical work, Grace Abounds, he writes about shortly after coming to faith, he went through a dark period where he really wondered whether or not he could be saved, whether he was savable. Martin Luther went through a very similar experience after he was brought to faith, after he came to an understanding of justification. He also struggled with it. Now, I would argue that Luther struggled with it much more mightily even before He came to his understanding of justification. But it's the same place. The Lord, the Lord, unfortunately, allows us to go through this. We will naturally question whether or not the promises God makes can actually be fulfilled. Is Christ actually going to save me? Now, our natural tendency is to want to say, no, I don't think like that. I bet you do, more often than you think. We do have a tendency to go through these things at times. So we must help each other in the midst of them. We must be help to others. How can I help you? As you struggle with assurance, as you struggle with security, as you struggle with the promises of God, trying to understand these things. Yeah. Now remember, Christian is young in the faith here, so you don't forget that, right? This is not a mature believer running into these things. This is a new believer who's just come to understand these things. Pliable is the example of it. New believer, comes to the first major trouble, he's out of here. So these are the experiences of that first believer. But let me suggest, even as I said at the outset, you don't necessarily have to be a new believer to fall into the pits of despond. You can be older in the faith and come to those things too. And as you get older physically and the number of candles on your birthday cake goes up, you may wonder at times, have I really been faithful? Am I really following the path? Am I really saved? I would suggest to you those kinds of questions are normal. But I would also suggest this, as help intimates, when he says, for as the sinner is awakened about his lost condition, implies that to ask such questions means something. And what does it mean? That you have in fact been awakened to your sin. That's right. The pliable is not awakened to his sin. He doesn't care. And all the people still back in the city, they don't care. Christian cares.
Is that why he pliable didn't have the burden on his back? Because he
Correct.
didn't recognize his sin?
Right. Yep. He had not been awakened to his sin.
He wasn't saved at this point.
Who?
Christian.
Oh,
His name.
what's that? I do. I think he's saved at this point, yeah. But again, let's, like I said,
Awareness of sin.
yeah.
Maybe no conversion. But, and obviously going through the book, he had to be given a name.
Right.
So Christian, I think, was his...
But he's given it's kind of ironic, though, that he's given a name in the second section, not in the first. So if Bunyan really was considering that he wasn't a Christian at this point, why call him that until he gets somewhere down the line? I'm suggesting let's be careful that we don't treat this as a chronological treatise and try to discover, is he regenerate here or not regenerate here? Let's just take the story for what it is. As a man who is, as even as Help says, has come to understanding of sin, okay, you're there. For those of us who come to an understanding of sin, what do we learn from this? There will be times when we will question the veracity of God's word, but that's when we seek help from others, that we stay faithful. We don't become a pliable and just walk away because it's too hard. Okay? The Slough of Despond. Fortunately, Christian is out of it.